The Springfield post office smelled faintly of cardboard, toner ink, and powdered sugar from the jelly-filled donuts someone always left half-eaten in the break room. Mornings there had a rhythm, a sluggish, slightly disgruntled rhythm, like an orchestra conducted by someone who had never seen a baton before. Despite the clatter of sorting trays, the rhythmic beeping of postage scanners, and the occasional ringing phone that nobody wanted to pick up, the place wasn't alive. It merely existed, dragging through each day as if resisting the concept of momentum itself. And at the center of that stubborn stillness stood Mark Hansen. At 33 years old, Mark carried an air that made him seem older. Not in the wrinkled or weary sense, but in the way he moved, the way he paused before every action as though performing a silent calculation. His co-workers called him the tortoise, though usually not to his face. Customers called him that slow guy, and sometimes more colorful variations when they thought he couldn't hear. But Mark always heard. He just never reacted beyond a faint, apologetic smile. This morning, like countless others, the line had already begun forming before the doors unlocked at 9. Springfield wasn't a big town, but for some reason its residents behaved as though the post office were the beating heart of civilization, and every minute waiting here was a minute stolen from their destinies. People sighed dramatically, shifted from foot to foot, checked their watches, and whispered complaints loud enough to be heard. Mark didn't mind. In fact, he had grown accustomed to meeting irritation with a kind of gentle indifference. His first customer of the day was a middle-aged man wearing a baseball jacket and impatience like cologne. He slapped a padded envelope onto the counter. "Priority," he barked. "And please don't take forever. Some of us have jobs." Mark's hands hovered over the envelope, his expression as serene as ever. "Yes, sir. I'll be as quick as I can." That phrase, the one he repeated daily, had become almost ironic. Quick for Mark was a relative term. He scanned the barcode, weighed the envelope twice, then held it up to the light as though contemplating the secrets of the universe inside. Only when he was satisfied that the postal seal adhered correctly did he continue entering the address into the system. The man drummed his fingers loudly. "Come on, buddy. It's not a kidney transplant." Mark smiled softly. Of course, just being thorough. That was always his excuse. His comfort, his armor. The man left grumbling, and the next customer stepped forward. An elderly woman with a crocheted shawl around her shoulders, handing over a stack of Christmas cards, even though it was only September. "Good morning, Mrs. Fitzgerald," Mark greeted. She winked at him. "Still checking the weight on each one, dear? Even though they're all identical?" "Yes," he said sheepishly. "Better safe than sorry." She didn't complain. She never did. Somehow she understood him or at least tolerated him. But many others did not share her patience. By 10:30, the line had doubled. The atmosphere thickened with collective frustration. Then came the moment everyone dreaded. The moment Mark began writing down a return address by hand because the customer's handwriting was too ambiguous. Even his supervisor, Carla, groaned from across the room. But Mark couldn't help it. He didn't know how to be any different, not anymore. Every envelope he touched, every label he printed, every seal he pressed into place. He treated them as though the lives of strangers depended on them. Because once they had. 3 years earlier, Mark had been a different version of himself. The quick, casual clerk everyone liked because he made jokes while printing postage and sent people on their way in 2 minutes flat. He'd been careless, in a harmless way, or so he thought. Then came the letter. A pale blue envelope with hearts drawn in the corner and smudged ink across the name. The handwriting was messy but readable enough, or at least Mark believed he had read it correctly. He was in a rush that day, his shift ending soon, and the sorting machine was backed up, and he didn't want to stay late again, not after 2 weeks of overtime. So he typed in the address quickly. Too quickly. He didn't double-check the unit number. He didn't re-examine the smudge to make certain. He didn't match it against the soldier's previous mail record like he had been trained to do. He sent it off and thought nothing of it. A week later, he learned the truth. The letter hadn't reached its destination in time. The soldier it was meant for, Private Daniel Cooper, only 19, had already been killed by the time the envelope arrived at the correct unit. The male supervisor read the incident report aloud in the back office while Mark stood shaking, unable to breathe. The letter, written by the private's young fiancé, had been her last message before the tragedy. And because Mark had been in a hurry, even that final comfort had arrived too late to be read. He never forgave himself. He attended the funeral uninvited, standing far behind the family, hidden among the trees near the cemetery fence. The mother's sobs haunted him. The fiancé's trembling hands as the casket lowered stayed burned in his memory. He didn't approach them. He didn't have the right. But he left flowers at the entrance and walked home with a new vow. Never again. No mistake. Not even a small one. Not ever. Since that day, Mark's life became a chain of rituals. Double-checking, triple-checking, slowing down until time itself seemed reluctantly tethered to him. He didn't care about the complaints. He didn't care about the eye rolls. He only cared about precision, about honor, about doing things right. And Springfield never understood why their slowest worker was also their most dedicated one. Near noon, the bell above the post office door jingled again. A soft breeze, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the lawn outside, drifted in. Mark glanced up automatically. A woman with blonde waves stepped into line. Mrs. Rowling, one of his loudest critics. She was already tapping her foot. He braced himself. She always complained about him drawing out her mornings. But today she wasn't the one he should have worried about. Behind her stood a man wearing a navy baseball cap pulled low enough to obscure half his face. He clutched a small brown-wrapped package against his chest. His stance was rigid, almost tense, like someone unaccustomed to being in public spaces. Mark noticed things like that, small cues, subtle details. It was impossible not to after the incident 3 years ago. The line crawled forward, and with each new customer, Mark's careful processing slowed things even more. The tension in the room rose. Finally, it was Mrs. Rowling's turn. "Please tell me you learned to speed up," she complained before even reaching the counter. Mark offered a gentle smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll do my best, ma'am." She rolled her eyes dramatically while handing over a small birthday parcel. Mark handled it with the same reverence he handled every object. Measuring, confirming postage weight, checking address clarity, running the barcode twice. "Honestly," she huffed, "you could have been a surgeon with how long you take." "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Just hurry," she muttered. Behind her, the man in the baseball cap shifted uneasily. His eyes darted around the post office, scanning corners, exits, people. Mark noticed because he always noticed. Eventually, Mrs. Rowling left, muttering one last complaint under her breath. Then the man in the cap stepped forward. His voice was low, abrupt. "I need this shipped. Priority." Mark nodded politely. "Of course, sir." He took the package into his hands. It was heavier than it looked. Oddly heavy. He tilted it slightly, and something inside shifted with a distinctive metallic click. Not coins. Not screws. Not anything familiar. Mark's heartbeat quickened. A rare occurrence for him. Sir? Does this package contain electronics, or?" "No questions," the man snapped. "Just ship it." Customers behind him murmured impatiently, but Mark didn't look up. His fingers traced the edges of the parcel. The wrapping was done carefully, too carefully. No seams, no tape inconsistencies, nothing visible. Whoever wrapped it had been precise. Intentional. Mark swallowed. "Sir, I'm afraid I need a return address." "It's not required." The man's jaw tensed. "Just send the damn thing." Mark forced a calm smile. "I'm sorry. Regulations require that." The man stepped forward abruptly, voice hovering just above a threat. "I said hurry up." The line behind them grew restless. People groaned. Someone whispered loudly, "Oh great, he's handling it," dripping with sarcasm. Mark ignored the irritation around him. He lifted the package again and pressed a finger gently against one corner. There was something inside, metal, wiring, maybe. He had to check. He had to be certain. "Sir, I'll need to inspect." "Stop." The man reached for the box. Instinctively, Mark pulled it back. The motion was subtle but enough to loosen the paper wrapping. A tear ran across the seam. Then the box slipped. It hit the counter. Crack. Everyone froze. A thin metallic seam split open just enough for Mark to see the truth inside. Tightly wound wires, a small digital display, and a blinking red light. In the span of a second, Mark's pulse hammered in his veins. His mouth went dry. His legs weakened. But his hands, the hands that once cost a young soldier his final letter, did not tremble. They held the package firmly and steadily, not allowing it to move even an inch from the angle it had landed in. The man in the cap bolted for the door. Someone screamed. Carla hit the alarm. And Mark stood there, motionless. His mind a wideout of disbelief and clarity all at once. A bomb. In his hands. Everything went silent inside him. A thick, heavy silence broken only by the faint ticking of the countdown inside the cracked seam. He barely heard the chaos erupting around him. People ran for exits. The alarm wailed overhead, and someone was shouting to call the police. The walls twisted around the edges of his vision. But Mark remained rooted, unable to let go, unable to shift the box even a centimeter. Because something told him, deep in the pit of his stomach, that if he did, the device would explode. 3 years ago, a mistake ruined lives. And now, precision might be the only thing saving them. As footsteps thundered outside and the sound of approaching sirens echoed down the street, Mark held the box as though holding the fragile hinge between life and death. His breath quivered. His heart hammered. His palms burned. But he did not move. Not yet. Not until help arrived. Not until someone told him what to do. And as the door burst open and armed officers poured into the room, Mark kept his eyes fixed on the blinking red numbers, aware that he had just stepped into a moment that would change everything, just as the past had once changed him. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The true test of his slow, careful nature was still to come. The first thing Mark registered was the sound of boots hitting linoleum. Heavy, purposeful, echoing through the emptied post office like war drums. The front doors crashed open, bouncing against the walls, and 3 armed officers surged inside. Weapons raised, scanning corners and counters with rigid precision. One voice cut above the others, deep and commanding. Mark, don't move. He recognized the voice even before he saw the man. Detective Samuel Jackson, Springfield's most intimidating piece of law enforcement, and a regular customer who mailed crime scene evidence like other people mailed birthday cards. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and always looked as though he had shaved in the car on the way over. His badge gleamed on his belt as he strode across the floor, squinting through the dim emergency lights until his eyes fell on the frozen figure behind the counter. Mark stood exactly where he had been when the alarm rang, still holding the cracked metal box in both hands. His arms locked at a rigid angle that burned from elbow to wrist. His breath trembled with every exhale, but his grip did not falter. The faint ticking inside the box continued, steady and merciless. Jackson raised a hand to stop the officers behind him. Easy. No sudden movement. One of them whispered, Jesus Christ. Is that what I think it is? Mark swallowed hard. It's active. Or at least I think it is. When I dropped it, it made a sound. I didn't want to change its position. You did the right thing, Jackson said, though the raw tension in his voice hinted that the situation was anything but under control. Bomb squad is on the way. Just hang in there. I can't put it down, Mark said. I'm not asking you to, Jackson replied. But he wasn't smiling, and that terrified Mark more than anything. Jackson always had a half-smirk ready, even in the worst circumstances. Not today. The post office was nearly silent now, save for the alarm bleeding overhead and the faint hum of fluorescent bulbs flickering uncertainly near the ceiling. A stray envelope skittered across the floor, pushed by the draft of the busted door. Papers rustled on abandoned counters. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed closer. Mark's arms trembled again. He shifted the tiniest bit on his feet, compensating, trying to keep the angle of the box exactly the same as it had been when it cracked open. Don't adjust it unless absolutely necessary, Jackson warned sharply. I know, Mark whispered. His throat was dry. My fingers are getting numb. I know, Jackson repeated, softer this time. Just hold out a little longer. Minutes stretched. They felt like an eternity, winding painfully around Mark's nerves. Officers sealed the building, evacuated nearby shops, blocked off traffic. More sirens approached, multiple vehicles this time. Tires screeched outside, followed by pounding footsteps. Then another team burst through the door. Dark uniforms, heavy gear, face shields, armored vests. The bomb squad. Their leader, a woman named Claire Donovan, whom Mark had seen on local TV during emergency broadcasts, strode in with controlled urgency. Her eyes swept the scene in a single, assessment-rich glance. Is that the device? She asked, pointing. Yes, Jackson said. It fell when the suspect tried to grab it. He said he heard it click. And the display? Donovan asked. There's a countdown, I think. Mark hesitated. I saw the numbers decreasing. All right, Donovan replied, already lowering her equipment case to the floor. No one touches anything. No vibrations. No shifts. And for God's sake, keep those doors steady. The officers nearest the entrance froze in place. Donovan stepped slowly toward Mark, crouching slightly to see the cracked seam without changing the angle of the box. She whistled under her breath. Pressure sensitive and motion triggered. This is bad. I figured, Mark whispered. You've been holding it how long? Donovan asked. I don't know. Maybe 10 minutes. That's a long time to be gripping an active device, Donovan murmured. You've done extremely well. Mark didn't feel like he'd done well. He felt like a glass thread stretched to the point of breaking. His fingers throbbed with pins and needles. His back ached. His vision flickered with faint static around the edges. Tell me what to do, he whispered. We're going to stabilize it first, Donovan said. She gestured to her team. Prep the foam brace and shock gel. We need to fix the device in its current orientation before we do anything else. One of her teammates knelt beside her, carefully opening a padded container lined with thick, gel-filled wedges. They looked like medical supports, the kind used for immobilizing broken limbs. This was improvisation, Mark could tell. Even experts were nervous. Donovan met his eyes, calm yet intense. Okay, Mark, I'm going to place the bracing around your hands. You'll feel pressure, but don't adjust your grip. Understand? Yes, Mark breathed. She moved with extraordinary delicacy, sliding the curved wedges around his wrists, forearms, and the bottom edge of the metal box. Another technician layered shock-absorbent gel between the braces and the box, molding it into shape like clay. They worked in near silence, communicating with soft nods and brief whispers. Every movement they made was calculated, measured, controlled. When the bracing was secure, Donovan exhaled slowly. All right, we're stabilizing your arms now. She tightened fiberglass straps around his elbows and upper arms, fixing them in place against the adjustable rig her team had brought. Soon, the only thing Mark could still move freely were his fingers, and even those remained locked in their original position. The pressure eased slightly from his muscles, but not enough to eliminate the ache radiating through him. Still, it was something. You're doing well, Donovan said again. I don't understand, Mark whispered. Why would someone mail this? Jackson answered from behind her. We think the suspect intended for it to detonate en route. Could have taken out the mail truck. A whole neighborhood block, depending on where it exploded. Mark's chest constricted. The idea that his hands were currently preventing the destruction of the city made the air feel too thick to breathe. His careful habits, his slow, tedious, mocked habits, had somehow prevented disaster. I heard a sound, he murmured, still unable to process it. That's why I checked. I always check. Jackson's voice softened. Good thing you did. But Donovan wasn't finished. She leaned in closer to the box, peering into the seam through a thin, specialized magnifier. Timer's partially obstructed, but from what I can see, we're under 3 minutes now. Mark's heart stuttered. 3 minutes? At most, she confirmed. Then she looked him squarely in the eyes. Mark, I need you to listen carefully. I'm listening. We're going to transfer the device from your hands into a containment cradle. The cradle will hold it in the exact angle you've been keeping. Once secured, we'll attempt to disable the trigger and cut the detonation circuit. And if the angle changes? Mark asked. Donovan didn't answer immediately. Jackson did. Then all hell breaks loose. Mark closed his eyes for a single heartbeat, inhaled shakily, and nodded. Okay, what do you need me to do? Just stay absolutely still, Donovan said. We'll do everything else. Her team brought over a specialized containment cradle, an adjustable frame lined with shock-dampening gel and titanium rods. They positioned it beneath the device, millimeter by millimeter, aligning the angle with painstaking care. One technician held a digital protractor, calling out minute adjustments. 2 degrees lower. No, 0.8 higher. Hold it. Okay. The cradle's base rose slowly, one knob turn at a time. Mark felt the faintest shift in pressure against the underside of the box as the frame made contact. His breath halted. Sweat trickled down his back. Donovan's gloved hand hovered just above his. We're going to transfer the weight now. Keep your grip, but let the cradle take some of the support. Don't resist it. Don't adjust. He nodded, barely. The pressure against his palms lightened. His arms trembled, part relief, part fear. The cradle held the box now, though his hands were still locked around it like clamps. Okay, Donovan murmured. Now, on my count, we will release your fingers. One by one. Mark felt panic flare. I don't know if I can. Yes, you can, Donovan said firmly, her eyes steady. We'll guide you. Jackson stepped closer. Mark, look at me. He did. You've held this thing together longer than anyone else could have. Whatever happens next, you're not alone. We're right here. Mark inhaled shakily. His pulse hammered in his temples. But he nodded. All right, Donovan said softly. We'll start with your left thumb. On my signal. She placed her gloved fingers over his, applying the faintest pressure. 3, 2, 1. Mark lifted his thumb. Nothing exploded. And the index, she whispered. He moved it. Still nothing. They continued thumb, finger, finger, finger. Each release more terrifying than the last. Every tiny movement sent ripples of tension through Mark's nerves. Sweat dripped from his hairline. His heart felt like a trapped bird against his ribs. Finally, the last finger lifted. His hands hovered empty above the cradle. The bomb lay fully supported in the frame, unmoved, unchanged. Mark's knees buckled. Easy. Jackson grabbed him under the arms as Donovan refocused on the device. The bomb squad swarmed the cradle with wires, clamps, scanners, and delicate tools. Mark couldn't see their faces anymore. His vision was blurred from strain and adrenaline. He barely registered being helped into a chair, his braced arms freed from the rig. The room swayed around him. But he heard Donovan's voice. Splicing the trigger wire now. Control node exposed. Timer at 50 seconds. Clipping bypass. Silence. A faint electronic beep. Then Donovan exhaled. Timer frozen. Trigger lock engaged. A wave of relief swept the room. Mark felt his body fold forward, his head in his hands. He didn't cry. There was no room left inside him for tears. Only numbness. And the slow dawning realization that he had just lived through something that should have killed him. Should have killed dozens. Maybe hundreds. Jackson knelt beside him. You okay? Mark nodded weakly. My arms hurt. I'd be worried if they didn't, Jackson said with a wry smile. You held a bomb longer than most people hold their breath. Mark exhaled shakily. Is it safe now? Safe enough, Donovan answered, stepping over with her helmet tucked under her arm. We'll take it from here. But Mark, she paused, her expression shifting from professional to something warmer. You prevented a catastrophe. Your attention to detail saved lives today. He didn't know how to respond. Praise felt alien, uncomfortable, like a coat that didn't fit. I just did what I always do, he murmured. Exactly, Jackson said. And that made all the difference. Outside, the sound of crowds murmuring, news vans arriving, and police cordoning off the area drifted into the building. The world was already reacting. Springfield would remember this day, would remember the man who worked too slowly, slow enough to notice what no one else would have. Mark leaned back in the chair, exhausted but alive. His pulse finally began to steady. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving a hollow fatigue in its place. Around him, officers continued their operations. Technicians dismantled the device. Donovan briefed the chief over the radio, and the world slowly returned to motion. But Mark felt as though his own world had stopped, suspended in the moment when he first saw the wires through the cracked seam. Everything that happened after felt dreamlike, impossible. He forced his breathing to even out. One inhalation, one exhalation, and again. Jackson rose to his feet. "We'll need your statement in a bit. But first, paramedics will want to check you." "I'm fine," Mark said. "Humor them," Jackson replied. "You survived a bomb. That earns you one medical checkup at least." Mark managed a faint smile. As the paramedics approached, Donovan walked past him toward the door, pausing only once to glance back. "Good work today, Mark. Real good." Then she was gone. Mark closed his eyes. The echo of her words lingered like a distant, unfamiliar warmth. He felt something shift subtly inside him, like the first crack in a wall built over years of guilt and self-blame. But whatever that change was, it would have to wait. Because as the paramedics wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and escorted him toward the exit, he didn't know what waited outside. Photographers, reporters, panicked neighbors, or the silent weight of becoming something he never imagined. A hero. He stepped outside into blinding sunlight. The world surged toward him. And somewhere in the crowd, unseen by anyone, a figure in a Navy baseball cap watched quietly, then slipped away. Everything was far from over. The sunlight hit Mark so sharply that for a moment he had to turn his face away, blinking against the glare. The world outside the post office had transformed in the time he'd been frozen inside, holding a bomb like a fragile animal between his hands. Police cars lined the street. Yellow tape fluttered weakly in the breeze, blocking off the sidewalk. Neighbors gathered behind barricades, murmuring with restless energy, the kind of hum that rises when chaos collides with curiosity. Reporters jockeyed for position, microphones raised like weapons. Camera flashes punctured the air, each burst a tiny explosion. Someone called his name, at least he thought they did, but everything felt muffled, like he'd submerged himself underwater. Paramedics guided him gently toward an ambulance parked nearby. One of them, a young man with sandy hair and tired eyes, kept repeating, "Watch your step," as though Mark might forget how to walk. "Sit here. Let me check your blood pressure." A cuff tightened around his arm while the medic spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder. Mark couldn't process the words. He stared blankly across the street at a row of maple trees swaying in the wind. His thoughts drifted to Private Cooper's funeral, to the rows of identical white headstones, to the mother's trembling sobs. He'd thought no moment could ever be heavier than that day. But now he had held a bomb. He had felt death press its cold breath against his skin, felt the minutes slide out beneath him like sand through an hourglass. And by some impossible twist of fate, he was still here. "You're doing great," the medic said as he removed the cuff. Mark hadn't said a word. Another medic, this one older and heavier, approached with a clipboard. She looked down at him, eyes softening. "Mind telling me your name?" "Mark," he answered hoarsely. "And your last name?" "Hansen." "All right, Mark. Any dizziness? Vision changes? Chest pain?" "No. Just tired." "That's expected." She offered a sympathetic nod before scribbling notes. "Raise your arm. Let me check circulation." She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. "A bit of tachycardia, but that's normal after what you went through." Her eyebrows knit. "Do you understand what happened today?" His mouth opened, but nothing came out for a moment. "I found a bomb," he whispered. "I held it." "You did more than that," she said gently. "You kept it from detonating. Most people would have dropped it and run." "I wanted to," he admitted. "But I didn't." "Good thing." She patted his shoulder. You saved a lot of lives. He didn't respond. He wasn't sure he believed her. Hero wasn't a word that fit him. It hung awkwardly in the air like a suit tailored for someone taller. A shadow loomed across the sunlight, blocking the glare. Detective Jackson stepped forward, hands on his hips, eyes narrowed against the brightness. "How's he doing?" he asked the paramedics. "He's stable," the older medic replied. "He'll be okay, but we want to keep him sitting for a bit. His adrenaline is still up." Jackson nodded. "Mind if I borrow him for a second? Just need a few details." "As long as he stays seated," the medic said. Jackson crouched down so he was eye level with Mark. "You all right?" "I think so," Mark whispered. "Good, because I need to ask you something important." Jackson glanced sideways at the crowd beyond the yellow tape. "Our suspect got away." Mark blinked slowly. "The man with the baseball cap. You saw him clearly?" "As clearly as I could," Mark said. "He didn't look at me much, but I remember his voice." He swallowed hard. "And his hands. He had a scar on the back of his right hand. A long one." "That's something." Jackson nodded. "Got a direction he fled?" "Left," Mark said after a moment of concentration. "Toward Birchwood Avenue. We're sweeping the area now." Jackson rubbed his jaw. "He wasn't expecting you to open the package, was he?" Mark shook his head. "No. When I started checking it, he looked scared." "Not scared," Jackson corrected quietly. "Agitated. People like him don't get scared unless their plans fall apart." "You ruined whatever he intended to do." Mark shifted uneasily. "I didn't mean to. I was just—" Jackson smiled faintly. "Doing your job. I know." A gust of wind rustled the police tape. A few reporters shouted questions. "Who found the device? Is the suspect armed? Are more bombs expected?" Officers blocked them from crossing the barricade, but tension crackled across the street like static electricity. Jackson ignored the reporters. "Look, Mark, I want you to know you did everything right today." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I've seen seasoned officers freeze under that kind of pressure. But you didn't." Mark didn't know what to say. Praise like this hit him strangely, like punches softened by velvet. He wasn't used to being seen not like this. Jackson continued, tone firm now. "We'll need you at the station in a couple hours for a statement. For now, just rest." "Okay." But rest seemed impossible. His body felt jittery, hollow, like he had run a marathon on legs made of wire. The crowd across the street stared at him, some pointing, others whispering. A child tugged on her mother's sleeve, asking something. The mother leaned closer, whispering back while looking at Mark as if he were a strange artifact. The medic returned with water. "Drink. Sip slowly." He obeyed, letting the coolness slide down his throat. His hands shook faintly around the bottle. "Hey!" Jackson said suddenly, tilting his head. "You feel up to walking? We can take you somewhere quieter." Mark nodded. "Please." The detectives flanked him as he slid off the ambulance seat. His legs wobbled, but he remained upright. They guided him toward a nearby bench under the shade of a maple tree, far from the cameras, far from the anxious buzz of speculation. The shade washed over him like mercy. Children played across the street in the park, blissfully unaware of what nearly happened. A dog barked at a squirrel. A cyclist rode past, earbuds in, head bobbing to unheard music. The world continued, oblivious, indifferent. Mark felt like a fracture in its rhythm. He sat heavily on the bench. Jackson stood nearby, arms crossed. Two other detectives spread out behind him. One was muttering into a radio. Another scanned license plates on passing cars. "Mark," Jackson said, "walk me through it again. Everything you noticed about the man." Mark closed his eyes. He kept his hat low. He didn't make eye contact. He was impatient, but not like the usual customers. Not annoyed. More like he was afraid of being delayed. "Anything else?" Jackson asked. "He didn't want me to check the package," Mark said. "When I insisted, he tried to grab it. That's when it fell." "That tracks with the explosive expert's theory," Jackson muttered. He probably didn't want it damaged too early. Wanted it detonated further along the route. Mark felt a cold wave move through him. He was planning to kill the mail carrier. And whoever lived near the truck's route, Jackson said. Mark stared at the ground. He imagined the mail truck bursting into shrapnel and flame. He imagined burning debris raining down on houses. He imagined children screaming. He tightened his hands until his knuckles whitened. "I don't understand why," he whispered. "Why would someone do that?" Jackson exhaled heavily. "We don't know yet, but we will." Silence settled between them. Leaves rustled overhead. The breeze chilled the sweat drying on Mark's skin. Then Jackson's radio crackled. "Detective, we found something." Jackson straightened. "What kind of something?" "Possible visual on the suspect. Abandoned alley behind Maple Street. Looks like he ditched a bag. And there's another device inside." Mark's blood ran cold. Jackson didn't waste a second. "I'm on my way." He glanced sharply at Mark. "You stay with the paramedics. Don't move." "Is it another bomb?" Mark asked softly. "Probably," Jackson said, voice clipped. "Which means today isn't over yet." He hurried toward his car, his team rushing after him. Engines roared to life. Sirens lit up again. Within seconds, they were gone. Mark sat frozen on the bench, heart pounding anew. Another device. Another threat. And maybe, just maybe, the man in the baseball cap wasn't done. The world around him blurred at the edges. The park fading into a smear of color. He felt the medic's presence beside him, asking if he needed oxygen. He shook his head numbly. His thoughts drifted like smoke, unfocused, unsteady. Another device. Another plot. Another chance for everything to go terribly, horribly wrong. He glanced at the post office behind him. The windows reflected the afternoon light, casting warped shadows on the sidewalk. In those distorted reflections he saw himself, a man who once sent a letter to the wrong unit, a man defined by a mistake. And now he was something else entirely, something he didn't understand yet. He shut his eyes to steady his breathing. Minutes passed, maybe longer. People approached him. Officers, paramedics, even a woman from the mayor's office asking if he'd accept an interview later. He said no. He couldn't speak to a crowd, not now. Not about this. Eventually, the chaos around the post office thinned. Officers packed equipment, moved vehicles, redirected traffic. But Mark remained on the bench, as if anchored by an invisible weight. It was late afternoon when Jackson returned. His steps were heavier this time, his expression tighter. He rubbed his temples with one hand before approaching. "You holding up?" he asked. Mark nodded weakly. "Did you find him?" "No," Jackson said. "But we found evidence." The alley had a second device partially constructed. Same materials, same signature wiring. This wasn't some random act. The suspect is building multiple bombs. Mark felt a tremor run through him. Why abandon one? Maybe he panicked when the first one was compromised, Jackson said. Maybe he's scouting new locations. We don't know, but we've got every unit searching. He dragged a hand along the back of his neck. There's something else. Mark looked up. The abandoned device had traces of fingerprints, Jackson said. We're running them now. If we get a match, we'll know who we're dealing with. Mark swallowed. Do you think he'll come back? Jackson hesitated before answering. People like him rarely stop after one attempt. If he believes you interfered with his plan. He didn't finish the sentence. But Mark understood. A chill crept down his spine. Until we know more, I'm assigning an officer to watch your home, Jackson said. Just a precaution. Mark opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. He didn't have the strength to argue. Jackson patted his shoulder. We'll get him, but this is bigger than we thought. The shadows lengthened on the pavement. Evening approached, carrying a somber haze over Springfield. Mark felt the weight of everything pressing against him. The bomb, the suspect, the abandoned device, the whispers of strangers calling him a hero, and the quiet dread that someone out there now knew his face. Someone dangerous. He stood slowly, gripping the edge of the bench for balance. His legs were unsteady, but he forced himself upright. The medic offered to drive him home, but he refused gently. Jackson walked him to the curb where a patrol car waited. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." Mark nodded, sliding into the back seat. The door shut with a soft thud. The officer started the engine, and the car pulled away from the post office, the site of the worst moment of his life and, somehow, the moment that changed everything. As they drove through Springfield's quiet residential streets, Mark watched the world blur past. Houses glowed with warm lamplight. Sprinklers arched water across lawns. Couple walked a dog. A barbecue smoked in someone's backyard. Life moved peacefully, unaware of how close it had come to being torn apart. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. The officer glanced back. "You did something incredible today." Mark didn't answer. He wasn't sure anyone understood, not even himself, what he had done. The car turned onto Oakwood Lane, slowing before Mark's small white house at the end of the street. A second patrol car idled nearby, headlights dimmed, ready to keep watch. Mark stepped out slowly. His legs felt heavy. His shoulders slumped. The world felt distant, dreamlike, fragile. "You need anything?" the officer asked. "No," Mark murmured. "Thank you." He walked to his front door, each step slower than the last. The porch light flickered on automatically. A moth batted against it, wings tapping softly. Mark unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house greeted him with the smell of stale coffee and unopened mail. He flicked on the living room light, dropping his keys on the table. His hands trembled as he unbuttoned his uniform shirt, tossing it over a chair. He collapsed onto the sofa, exhaling the longest breath of his life. The silence inside the house felt different. Not comforting, but echoing. A hollow space expanded in his chest, filled with questions he didn't want to ask. Why had the suspect chosen the post office? What was the larger plan? Would he strike again? Had Mark only postponed something inevitable? His thoughts spiraled. Outside, a police cruiser's engine hummed faintly. Mark rose from the couch and walked to the kitchen sink, splashing cold water on his face. He stared at his reflection in the window. His eyes looked older. His jaw clenched. His skin was pale. He barely recognized himself. He dried his face with a towel and moved toward the bedroom, intending to lie down, close his eyes, shut the world out. But something stopped him. A noise, soft, deliberate, a metallic click, came from outside just beyond the living room window. Mark froze. Every instinct in him screamed. He stepped backward slowly, heart hammering, breath caught in his throat. The porch light cast long shadows across the yard. The police cruiser was still parked by the curb. The officer inside looked relaxed, unaware. The metallic click came again. Not loud, not random, close. Mark's pulse pounded. He edged toward the phone, reaching to dial. A sudden flash of movement flickered across the window. He sucked in a breath. Someone was there, watching, waiting. The figure disappeared into the shadows before he could make out details. Mark stumbled backward, panic rising, and then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, he heard it, the soft sound of footsteps retreating into the night. He grabbed the phone with shaking hands. "Detective Jackson," he whispered into the receiver. "Someone was outside my house." The line crackled. Jackson answered instantly, voice sharpened with urgency. "Stay inside. Lock all doors. We're on the way." Mark swallowed hard. He was here, detective. The suspect. He came back. And as those words left his mouth, he knew that the nightmare was far from over. It was only beginning. The story would continue in the next chapter, where the hunt for the bomber would tighten, secrets would surface, and Mark would find himself pulled deeper into a deadly game he never meant to play. The phone slipped slightly in Mark's trembling hand as he pressed himself against the wall, forcing slow breaths through tightening lungs. His heart hammered so violently that he thought the officer stationed outside must surely hear it through the windows. He swallowed, listening, really listening, beyond the heavy silence of his house. For a long moment, there was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, No metallic click. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the floorboards settling as the air conditioning kicked on. But the absence of sound only made the dread sink deeper, thicker, like tar clinging to every breath. "Mark, listen to me." Detective Jackson's voice crackled through the receiver, urgent yet steady. "We're 2 minutes out. An officer is already approaching your front door. Stay put." "He was here," Mark whispered, voice thin. "Someone was right outside. Do you see him now?" "No, do you see anything unusual? Shadows? Movement?" Mark forced himself to look again. Slowly, carefully, angling his head just enough to peer through the narrow gap between the curtain and the window frame. The streetlight cast a pale amber glow across the lawn. The police cruiser sat idling, a dark silhouette in the driveway. The officer inside seemed unaware, head lowered, possibly reading something or checking his phone. The porch steps were empty. The walkway was clear. The mailbox stood motionless. Yet Mark felt the presence like a weight. He wasn't imagining this. He couldn't be. "I don't see him," Mark murmured, gripping the phone tighter. "But I know he was here. I heard him." "We believe you," Jackson said. "Just stay away from the windows. Lock the back door too." "It's already locked." "Good. We'll sweep the whole block. Just hold tight." The call ended, leaving Mark in a vacuum of quiet that felt too heavy, too deliberate. Like the house itself was holding its breath. He backed away from the window, forcing himself toward the deadbolt on the front door. He locked it, checked it again. Then he hurried to the back door, even though he already knew it was secured. Still, he slid the second latch into place. Then the third. He reached for the blinds and lowered them all the way down until not a sliver of outside light leaked in. He didn't realize how fast he was breathing until the room tilted slightly, the edges of his vision tightening. He steadied himself against the counter and closed his eyes. "Get a grip," he whispered to no one, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. The knock on the door made him jump so violently he nearly dropped the phone. A moment later came a shout. "Police!" Mark rushed to the peephole. 2 officers stood on his porch. Familiar uniforms. Familiar faces. The cruiser outside was no longer occupied. The officer from earlier was now at the door, speaking into his radio. Mark released the breath he was holding. He unlocked the door. "Mr. Hansen, are you all right?" the first officer asked. Yes. No, I don't know," Mark said. "He was right outside." "We're going to sweep the perimeter," the second officer said. "Detective Jackson will be here any moment." Mark stepped back to let them inside, and the officers cleared each room with disciplined efficiency. Living room, hall closet, bathroom, bedroom, even the crawl space panel near the back door. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No disturbed footprints on the floor. But the officers didn't dismiss his claim. Their expressions remained serious, their questions precise. "What exactly did you hear?" "A click," Mark said. "Like something metal." Twice. Then footsteps. "Could it have been an animal?" "No," Mark said firmly. "It wasn't random. It was deliberate." Before the officers could respond, a car engine rumbled outside, and headlights swept across the curtained windows. Another knock rattled the door. Sharp, heavy, familiar. "Mark, it's Jackson." Mark opened the door again, and Detective Jackson stepped inside, his expression darker than before. Behind him stood 2 additional detectives with flashlights. "You're sure you saw someone?" Jackson asked, wasting no time. "Yes," Mark said. "I saw him, or something move, and I heard him." "He didn't approach the officers outside," Jackson muttered. "Not directly. He didn't try to make contact. That tells us something." "What does it tell us?" Mark asked. "That he's watching," Jackson said. "And he's cautious, probably evaluating what went wrong today." Mark felt another chill creep down his spine. "He came to my house. That's the part that bothers me," Jackson said. "He wouldn't take that risk unless he had a reason." "What reason?" Mark whispered. Jackson didn't answer immediately. He paced to the window and peeked through the blinds just enough to scan the street. Officers were now spread along the sidewalks, flashlights cutting through the darkness, checking bushes, porches, alleys, yards. Jackson exhaled slowly. You interfered with his plan. He wasn't expecting anyone to inspect the package that closely. You threw him off. He may see you as a threat now. Mark's stomach tightened. I'm not a threat. I'm just me. You're the man who spotted his bomb before it detonated, Jackson said. That makes you very important, whether you want to be or not. The words hit Mark like a blow he didn't see coming. Important. The very idea felt foreign. Wrong, even. He wasn't important. He worked slowly. He frustrated customers. He lived alone in a small, quiet house and kept to himself. He wasn't someone criminals worried about. But today had changed everything. Mark sank onto the couch, rubbing his palms against his knees to stop them from shaking. Jackson crouched in front of him again, just like earlier at the post office. You're not alone in this, Jackson said. We will protect you, but we need to know everything you can remember. Mark nodded, trying to piece together the fragmented images in his mind. He had on a navy baseball cap, dark jacket. He was tense when he walked in. He didn't want me to handle the package. His voice was low, raspy, and he had a scar on his right hand. A long one, Jackson recalled. You mentioned that earlier. Yes, good. We pulled fingerprints from the second device we found. With any luck, this scar will match someone in the system. Mark swallowed. Do you think he'll try again? Jackson's eyes flicked toward the window before he answered. Men like him don't stop after one failure. If anything, it pushes them harder. Why my house? Mark whispered. Because you changed the outcome of his plan, Jackson said simply. And people like him, they react to that. Mark stared down at his hands. Hands that still felt the ghost weight of the bomb. Hands that had once caused a mistake he could never erase. And now those same hands had saved dozens, maybe hundreds. It didn't feel real. A sudden knock at the back door made everyone jump. Officers reacted instantly, hands on holsters. Jackson signaled for them to hold while he moved cautiously to the window. A voice called out, muffled but familiar. Detective Jackson. Jackson peered outside, then relaxed slightly. It's the forensics team. He let them in, and the room filled with more law enforcement personnel. Gloves snapping on, cameras flashing as they dusted the windowsill, the porch, the side gate. Mark watched in a daze as they collected fibers, lifted prints, measured shoe impressions in the dirt where someone had definitely stood. Here, one forensic officer said to Jackson, pointing at a spot near the back fence. Footprints. Size 10, deep enough to indicate someone paused here. Watching, Jackson said, jaw tightening. This confirms it. Mark's breath hitched. He was right there. Yes, Jackson replied. Close enough to see you through the window. Mark's fingers curled into his palms. Why didn't the officer outside see him? He asked. Because the suspect knows how to move quietly, Jackson said. He knows how to avoid direct lines of sight. And he's smart enough to stay in blind spots. Mark shivered again. As the investigation continued, one of the detectives approached Jackson with a tablet in hand. We've got the first results from the fingerprint scan, he said quietly. Jackson took the tablet, scanning the information with furrowed brows. Damn it. What is it? Mark asked. Jackson turned the screen just enough for him to see. A name, a mugshot, a criminal record stretching back years. Domestic manufacturing of explosives, illegal possession of firearms, suspicion of arson, affiliation with an extremist group. His name is Caleb Rivers, Jackson said. He's been on the watch list before but slipped off the grid. Until now. Mark stared at the man's photo. Sharp, angular features, eyes cold and unblinking. He looked nothing like the average customer at the post office. Nothing like anyone who should ever have been near him. He's dangerous, Jackson continued, and unstable. And the fact that he abandoned one device means he's rushing, which makes him even more dangerous. Mark's throat tightened. He's targeting me. Jackson placed a hand on his shoulder. We won't let anything happen to you. The reassurance felt hollow. Not because Jackson was lying, but because the reality of the situation had grown larger darker, and more unpredictable. Mark wasn't just a witness. He was now tangled in the center of something enormous, something violent, something on the brink of escalation. Hours passed. Officers came and went. Forensics wrapped up. Statements were taken. The house was combed multiple times. Finally, well past midnight, Jackson approached him again. "We're relocating you," he said. "You're not staying here tonight." Mark blinked. "What? Where am I going?" "To a safe house," Jackson said. "You'll have protection. Minimal access. Only trusted personnel will know the location." "What about work?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You won't be going in tomorrow," Jackson said. "Or any time soon." Mark nodded slowly, as if each word was a stone he had to lift. He felt numb and stretched thin, like his body was a shell waiting to crack. "Pack what you need," Jackson instructed. Mark moved through his house like a ghost, gathering clothes, toiletries, his phone charger, a small photo of his parents from the shelf. He hesitated when he saw his postal uniform draped over the chair, creased, tired, still smelling faintly of paper and ink. He touched it once, then folded it gently and placed it in his bag. Within minutes, he was escorted outside. Police lights flashed one final sweep across his lawn before he climbed into the back seat of an unmarked car. The night air was heavy with crickets, and the world felt strangely hollow, as though everything familiar had been stripped away. Jackson sat beside him in the car. "You're doing the right thing." Mark didn't answer. The car pulled away, turning down the dark street. His house shrank behind them, swallowed by the night. As they drove toward the outskirts of Springfield, a cold realization settled in Mark's chest. His life, once predictable, quiet, orderly, had entered a world he didn't recognize. A world of bombers and manhunts and shadows outside windows. A world where he was no longer invisible. And somewhere in that darkness, Caleb Rivers was watching, plotting, waiting. The safe house awaited him. The night swallowed the car as it left Springfield's quiet streets behind, trading rows of sleepy homes for long, dark stretches of road lined by trees that leaned inward like silent witnesses. Mark sat rigidly in the back seat, his hands folded tightly in his lap, knuckles white against the dim glow cast by the dashboard. Every so often, Detective Jackson glanced back at him, his eyes reflecting the blue hue of the passing streetlights, but he didn't speak. Neither did Mark. There was nothing left to say. Not until they reached the place where words couldn't be overheard, where shadows didn't move with intention. Outside, the world was ink black. The hum of the engine grew louder as the car accelerated down a stretch of highway, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Mark stared out the window but saw nothing but blurred darkness. His thoughts drifted in and out like static. His mind was exhausted, stretched thin from fear, adrenaline, and the crushing awareness that someone very real and very dangerous, had stood outside his home. "What happens now?" Mark asked quietly, breaking the long silence. Jackson turned down the radio chatter, rubbing the bridge of his nose as though he'd been waiting for the question. "Now, we keep you safe, and we hunt him." Mark swallowed, throat tight. "Do you think he'll try again?" Jackson didn't lie. He never did. "Yes, a man like Caleb Rivers, he doesn't accept failure. And you disrupted something big today." Mark lowered his gaze. "I didn't mean to." "That doesn't matter," Jackson replied. "What matters is he sees you as the reason his plan unraveled. Men like him react emotionally to setbacks. Dangerous combination." Mark exhaled slowly, feeling his pulse echo in his fingertips. "I'm not brave, Detective." Jackson almost smiled. "You held a bomb, Mark, for longer than most people can hold their breath. Don't sell yourself short." "It wasn't bravery," Mark said softly. "It was, I don't know, reflex. Or maybe, deep down, it had been guilt. Guilt from years ago. Guilt that had twisted itself into an obsession for perfection." But that wasn't something he was ready to say aloud. The road curved. The headlights caught the outline of a large sign showing a county boundary. They were leaving Springfield proper. "How much farther?" Mark asked. "Not long," Jackson said. We're taking you to an off-grid intel cabin. State-owned. Barely anyone knows it exists. You'll be safe there. Who will be there? Just you, me, and 2 rotating officers, Jackson replied. We'll keep shifts. You won't be alone. Mark nodded faintly. The idea of being alone now felt unbearable. The car turned onto a dirt road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Trees pressed closer, creating a canopy overhead that blocked out even the moonlight. As they followed the winding path, Mark could feel his tension growing. Not because he didn't trust the police, but because every flicker of movement in the woods looked like a lurking shadow. Every branch creaked like a footstep. Every gust of wind carried the echo of Caleb's imagined approach. Finally, the headlights revealed a small wooden cabin tucked between tall pines. It was unremarkable, almost invisible in the darkness, save for the faint glow of a porch light powered by a generator humming quietly at the side of the building. The car rolled to a stop. "We're here," Jackson said, stepping out. Mark followed slowly, the cool night air hitting him like a splash of water. The forest smelled of pine, damp soil, and the faint scent of rain lingering in the leaves. Crickets chirped in the distance. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted. For a moment it felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. The officers unloaded Mark's small bag. Jackson unlocked the cabin, pushing the door open with a creak. Inside, the air was stale, as though the building had held its breath since the last time someone stepped inside. The cabin was modest. One main room with a worn couch, a small kitchen tucked into the corner, a wooden table, and a short hallway leading to 2 small bedrooms. A few lamps cast a warm amber glow across the wooden walls. "It's not much," Jackson said, switching on more lights. "But it's safe. No internet, no phone line. Cell signal barely exists out here. That's intentional. So no one can track us," Mark murmured. "Exactly." 2 officers entered behind them. Young, alert, focused. They began sweeping the rooms without being told, their flashlights darting into corners, under furniture, through narrow crevices. Their presence made Mark's chest loosen slightly. Jackson gestured toward the couch. "Take a seat. You need to rest." Mark sat, the cushions sinking beneath him with a sigh. For a moment, he simply stared at his hands, still slightly shaky, pale beneath the cabin lights. One of the officers approached Jackson. "Perimeter's clear. No signs of disturbance." "Good. Double patrol every hour." "Yes, sir." As the officers stepped outside to begin their rotation, Jackson took a seat across from Mark, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You know what the hardest part is?" Jackson asked suddenly. Mark looked up. "What?" "Waiting." The words settled between them like dust. Jackson continued. "The threat is real. We're on high alert. But right now, all we can do is wait for Rivers to make a mistake. And believe me, he will. Guys like him always do." Mark clasped his fingers together. "And what am I supposed to do while waiting?" "Try to sleep," Jackson said gently. "Eat. Let us do the heavy lifting." "I don't know if I can sleep," Mark admitted. "You will," Jackson said, leaning back. "Eventually exhaustion always wins." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Mark's mouth. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jackson stood and walked toward the kitchen. "You hungry? There's canned soup and instant coffee." Mark shook his head. "No appetite." "Try anyway. You'll feel better." As Jackson moved about the kitchen, clattering dishes and starting a kettle, Mark let his gaze wander around the room. The cabin walls were decorated sparingly. An old map of the county, a faded photograph of a forest, a small clock ticking steadily above the table. The sound was soothing, rhythmic, grounding. Tick, tick, tick. Each second reminded him of the timer he had watched slowly counting down earlier that day. His breathing hitched. He closed his eyes and willed the memory away. The cabin was safe. Here, the ticking was harmless. Jackson returned moments later with 2 mugs of steaming instant coffee. He set one in front of Mark. "Drink." Mark wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic and inhaled the faint scent of cheap coffee powder. It wasn't good coffee. Not even close. But the warmth seeped into his bones, chasing away some of the cold that had settled there. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the ticking clock, the hum of the generator outside, and the faint rustle of trees. "Detective," Mark said finally, setting the mug down. "Do you think he knows where this place is?" "No," Jackson said with full confidence. "Only a handful of people even know it exists, and most of them are in this room. And if he tries to follow the car?" "He didn't," Jackson replied. "We made 3 decoy turns, switched routes twice, and checked for tails. You were protected the whole way." Mark nodded slowly. Jackson watched him carefully. "You're thinking about the bomb." Mark rubbed his forehead. "I keep seeing it. The wires. The timer. My hands." "That's normal," Jackson said. "Your brain's still processing the shock." It felt like time stopped. "In a way, it did," Jackson said. "Moments like that leave a scar." Mark blinked. "Do you have scars like that?" Jackson paused. A shadow passed behind his eyes. "Everyone in my line of work does. It's part of the job. But you," he pointed at him, "you never signed up for this. Yet here you are, handling it better than half the people I've trained." Mark didn't know how to absorb that. He stared down at his coffee, letting the warmth seep into him. A knock sounded on the door. 3 sharp raps. Jackson stiffened instantly. His hand hovered near his holster. He exchanged a glance with Mark before stepping carefully toward the entrance. "It's Officer Lang," came a muffled voice. "All clear outside." Jackson exhaled, opened the door slightly, and nodded at the patrolman. "Anything unusual?" "No, sir. Quiet. 1 car passed by about 10 minutes ago but didn't slow down." "Good. Keep it that way." "Yes, sir." The door shut again. Jackson turned back toward Mark, but something in his expression shifted. His posture relaxed only slightly. His eyes, however, stayed sharp. "You should sleep," he said. "Your room's down the hall. First door on the right." Mark hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be here. I'll sleep in shifts with the officers." "And if something happens?" Jackson's voice softened. "Nothing is going to happen tonight." But Mark wasn't so sure. Still, exhaustion weighed him down. His legs felt heavy, his eyelids heavier. He stood slowly and walked down the short hallway, his steps soft against the wooden floorboards. The bedroom was small. A single bed, a lamp on a nightstand, a small dresser. The sheets smelled of storage, faintly musty, but clean. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face with both hands. He lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that didn't come. He listened, to the wind brushing against the trees, to the faint murmur of voices in the living room, to the distant hoot of an owl. But his mind replayed the moment the box had slipped from his hands. The metallic crack, the reveal of wires. Tick, tick, tick. His chest tightened. He rolled onto his side, gripping the pillow slightly. The cabin felt warm, but he shivered anyway. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him under. But dreams didn't bring rest. They brought the hallway outside his house, the window shadows, the glint of eyes watching him from the darkness. They brought the bomb, the countdown, the feeling of helplessness. And then, a sudden noise jolted him awake. The lamp flickered. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, creaked on the floor outside his door. Mark's breath caught. Maybe it was Jackson. Maybe it was an officer. Or, he sat up slowly, pulse pounding in his ears. The footsteps paused. The doorknob rattled. Mark froze. The rattling stopped. Silence thickened. Then came a quiet whisper, impossibly soft, barely audible, but unmistakably real. "Mark!" His blood turned to ice. No officer would whisper like that. No detective would say his name like that. He reached for his phone, but he didn't have it. Jackson had taken it earlier to avoid any tracking risks. The whisper came again, closer to the door now. "Mark!" The cabin suddenly felt too small, too vulnerable. The floorboards creaked. A shadow slipped under the door, shifting, stretching, as though someone outside moved slowly, deliberately. Mark bolted upright and backed against the opposite wall, breath shallow. And then, another sound. A crash. A shout. Jackson's voice, sharp and commanding. Get down. Gunshots cracked through the cabin walls, deafening and bright. Mark dropped to the floor, heart slamming in his chest. Chaos erupted outside the bedroom. The door burst open, and everything changed in an instant. The explosion of sound that tore through the cabin did not come from a bomb, only from gunfire, sharp and violent, shattering the fragile silence of the forested hideout. Splinters erupted from the doorframe as bullets struck the wood. Mark dropped to the floor before he truly understood what was happening. His heart slammed so hard he felt it in his teeth. Smoke stung his eyes. The cabin lights flickered as if the building itself recoiled from the noise. Another shot. A grunt. A crash. The floor trembled as someone heavy hit the ground outside his room. Jackson! Mark choked out, not even realizing he had spoken until the word left him. Mark, stay down! Jackson's voice thundered through the chaos. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Fast, heavy, uncoordinated. Like someone running sideways and stumbling. The air shifted as shadows danced under the doorframe. Mark crawled backward, hitting the far wall with a thud. His breath came in sharp gasps he couldn't control. A body slammed against his door. Another shot rang out, this one quieter, more focused. A soft cry followed. Then silence. Long, terrifying silence. Mark didn't dare move. The cabin creaked. The wind outside pressed against the wood like a curious hand. Something dripped onto the floor outside. Slow, wet, rhythmic. Blood. He knew it was blood. Mark! A voice called. His pulse jumped. He recognized the voice instantly. Jackson's. But fear had twisted everything tonight. Sounded deeper now, strained. Detective. Mark whispered. Yeah, it's okay. You can open the door. Mark stood shakily, his legs weak under him. Every movement felt like walking through mud. His hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment, unable to commit. He finally turned it. The door swung open. Jackson stood in the hallway, chest heaving, gun lowered. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. His shirt was torn on one shoulder. But he was alive. His eyes flicked over Mark quickly, as if checking for wounds. You good? Jackson asked. Mark couldn't speak. He only nodded, though his vision blurred from adrenaline tears he hadn't realized had formed. Behind Jackson, two officers lay on the floor. One was unconscious, breathing shallowly. The other sat slumped against the wall, clutching his side with a gloved hand slicked in blood. His face was pale but alert. And on the ground between them, Caleb Rivers. He wasn't moving. His baseball cap lay a few feet away, revealing messy dark hair and a face contorted in a grimace that would stay frozen forever. A gun rested beside his limp hand. The scar on the back of his right hand was unmistakable. Donovan's earlier words echoed in Mark's memory. Pressure-sensitive, motion-triggered, dangerous. But this danger was human, raw, deliberate. He forced his way in through the back window, Jackson said quietly. He disabled the generator, cut the outside lights, took out the first officer before anyone heard him. The bastard was meticulous. I'll give him that. Mark felt his stomach twist. I heard him. At my house. He followed us. He must have tracked the car before we ditched the route, Jackson replied bitterly. Or he found another way to locate you. He was determined. Mark swallowed hard. He whispered my name. Jackson's jaw tightened. He was hunting you. The reality of it hit Mark all at once. Hot, dizzying, overwhelming. His knees nearly buckled. Jackson moved forward and caught him by the arm before he fell. Hey! Jackson said, steady and grounding. You're safe now. It's over. But Mark didn't feel safe. Not yet. The echo of Caleb's whisper still lingered in his ears. A poisoned breath carried by memory. The cabin door burst open, and more officers stormed in. Paramedics followed, immediately kneeling beside the injured man. One of them, a young woman with braided hair, turned to Jackson. He's stable, she said, gesturing to the wounded officer. But he needs transport ASAP. Go, Jackson ordered. They moved swiftly, lifting the injured man onto a stretcher and carrying him out into the night. Others zipped Caleb's lifeless body into a black bag. The sound of the zipper scraping shut made Mark flinch. He stepped back into the bedroom doorway as officers cleared the hall. Jackson remained with him, hands on his hips, exhaling deeply. You saved us, Mark said softly, staring at the floor. Jackson looked at him. No, we saved you. That's our job. But if he got inside, Mark's voice cracked. He could have reached me. He didn't. Jackson's tone left no room for argument. And he won't. Not ever again. The cabin gradually emptied, leaving only Jackson and two officers who remained to process the scene. The generator restarted with a mechanical cough, and the cabin lights returned fully, sweeping away the ominous flicker. The forest outside settled back into its natural rhythm, the wind sighing gently through the branches. Mark leaned against the wall, exhausted. Jackson approached him slowly. Hey, he said softly. Let's get you outside. You don't need to see any more of this. Mark nodded, barely aware of himself. They stepped onto the porch. The crisp air kissed Mark's face, clearing his mind slightly even as his body swayed from weakness. A helicopter hovered faintly in the distance, heading toward the cabin with medical support. Police radios chirped with overlapping voices. For a long time they stood in silence. Jackson leaned his elbows on the porch railing. Mark followed suit, though his hands trembled as he rested them against the wood. You did everything right, Jackson said after a moment. From the post office to the house to tonight. You listened to your instincts. You stayed calm. I didn't feel calm, Mark whispered. Calm doesn't mean not being scared, Jackson replied. It means doing what you need to anyway. Mark inhaled shakily. The forest smelled of pine and smoke, and the faint metallic scent of blood carried on the wind. I should have noticed sooner, Mark said suddenly. At the post office. At home. Maybe if I'd seen something more, none of this would have happened. Jackson turned to him sharply. No, don't do that. Do what? Blame yourself. It's what I'm good at, Mark muttered. Jackson's voice softened. That stopped being true the second you held that bomb and didn't let go. You saved those people, Mark. You gave us the chance to catch him. You think any of this was your fault? No. Caleb Rivers chose violence. You chose to protect. Mark looked down at his hands. They had finally stopped shaking. Somehow, hearing it aloud, spoken with conviction, eased a weight he didn't even realize he had been carrying since the funeral years ago. Since that letter that arrived too late. Private Cooper, Mark murmured, surprising even himself. Jackson blinked. Who? Mark swallowed hard. Years ago, I made a mistake at work. I misread an address. A soldier never got a letter from his fiancée. He died before it reached him. Jackson's expression shifted, surprise, then something gentler. That's why you're so careful. I promised myself never to make another mistake. Never to let something slip through because of me. And you kept that promise, Jackson said. You held a bomb, Mark. Literally held it. And because of your caution, dozens of people are alive. Mark closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. Not sharp like fear, but warm, quiet, almost cleansing. For the first time, he whispered, voice cracking. It feels like I finally got something right. Jackson placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You got everything right. The two men stood in silence for a long time, letting the truth settle between them like dust in the golden glow of the porch light. Eventually, dawn crept into the sky, washing the forest in pale shades of pink and blue. Birds began to stir. The world, oblivious to the night's violence, awakened gently. Mark watched as light spread across the trees, the cabin, the officers packing up equipment. He felt lighter, not healed, not entirely. Some scars would always linger, but lighter in a way that made him believe he could move forward. What happens next? He asked quietly. Jackson smiled tiredly. Paperwork. Debriefings. A hell of a lot of rest for you. Maybe a medal or two. I don't want a medal. I figured, Jackson said with a chuckle. But you deserve one. Mark didn't respond. He only looked at the sunrise, steady, warm, unwavering. Finally, he said, I want to go home. Jackson nodded. We'll get you back there. Safely. Will everything go back to normal? Mark asked. Jackson paused before answering. Maybe not the same normal, but a new one. One you can live with. Mark took a deep breath. For once, he believed that might be true. As they walked toward the waiting car, the rising sun cast long shadows behind them. Two figures moving forward from a night filled with darkness, violence, and fear, but also survival and redemption. Mark turned one last time, looking at the cabin that had nearly become his final resting place. Instead, it had become something else entirely, the place where he stopped being defined by a mistake and became defined by what he saved. When he finally looked away, the forest shimmered with morning light, and Mark let himself feel, quietly but deeply, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope.